Hello, and welcome to this webinar this morning that's being hosted here at DLP. Oh, I think we're okay. Yeah, this is the latest in a series of webinars that we're hosting at DLP. Today's focus is very much on Bedford, obviously where we're based, and it's our headquarters. My name's Andrew Parry. I'm a director here in the Bedford office. We will be using colleagues across the Bedford office today, and also in our sister company at BE1. So you'll get to meet some of the team. I hope you enjoy the webinar. There will be an opportunity for questions, so if you use the chat function during the webinar, we will hopefully pick those up at the end, and we'll get through as many as we can. Obviously, if we can't get through them all, we'll come back to people separately. So let's crack on. Just to introduce, so in terms of format for today, I'll do a quick introduction, introduce you to the team, introduce you to some of the work we do in Bedford and the services that we offer. I'll then hand over to my colleague John Goodall, who's an Associate Director in our Strategic Planning Research Unit. He's going to be talking about the local plan review, what's happening strategic planning wise in Bedford and some of the opportunities that will give rise to. My colleague Hannah Albans, who's also an Associate Director in Bedford, will be talking about neighbourhood planning specifically. We're very active when it comes to neighbourhood planning in Bedford, so we've got a good handle on what's happening and the progress with that. So Hannah will provide some insight into that. We then thought it'd be useful to talk through a project example. So specifically the Friars police station project in the centre of Bedford, which is one that myself and my colleague Aart Koning at our BE1 architectural practice have been heavily involved with over the last few years. So we'll talk you through some of the interesting aspects of that. As I say, at the end, we'll then be doing a question and answer session with the time we have left. We're going to try and keep it to an hour, but obviously if we run over slightly, I apologise, but we'll do the best we can to stick to an hour. Oops, apologies. Just getting scripts with the technology. Here we go. So to introduce our Bedford team, at the moment we're a team of 9 qualified planners. As you can see from that diagram, we have a senior management team of 4 directors. That includes myself, our managing director, who many of you will know, Simon James, Neil Osborne, who's also one of our founding directors, and we have a consultant director, Amanda Bolson, who joined us a few years ago, who's got a lot of experience, particularly in the London market. Below that, we have 3 associate directors in Bedford at the moment. Hannah, who's obviously presenting today, and we have 2 Grahams, Graham Robinson and Graham Free, at associate director level. And below that, we have a team of junior qualified planners at senior and planner level, as well as a student planner who's recently joined us. Not to forget, obviously, the important work our administrator secretary Michelle does, who many of you will have met back in a long time ago when we had face-to-face office meetings, and also we have a GIS in-house team support as well, who provide a lot of the services to support planning, GIS mapping, and that's a standalone service that we offer as well. We're obviously working from home, as many people are still. And actually, that's, as a company, has brought us together a bit closer, I think, and we're actually working as one team across our offices around the country. So particularly, we've noticed with our Rugby, Bristol and London offices, we're sort of a pooled resource, as it were. So whilst we're 9 planners in Bedford, we have other planners elsewhere around the country that we utilise and we share resources with. We're working in a number of sectors at the moment, so we're very much busy in terms of residential work, but we're also doing a lot of commercial work. Retirement living is another key area for us, and that's a key growth area, as I'm sure many people are aware. We've also developed a bit of a specialism in terms of religious buildings, and that's something that Aart at BE1 is working on a number of projects at the moment. And we're also doing a lot of energy sector work, so renewable energy, battery storage, etc. As I say, we're working closely with our colleagues in the wider DLP group as well. So within the DLP group, we have a team of architects at BE1, We have a sustainable development and delivery team who deal with sort of transport and drainage matters. And we also have a strategic planning research unit. So that's the DLP group. Bedford Planning and DLP Planning is a part of that group. Apologies, just in terms of the next slide should be the core area of operation. Here we go. We're based in Bedford. The map here shows broadly the areas that we cover. That's not to say that we're limited to those areas. We do work outside, but I would say 90% of the work we do is probably within those areas. We're doing a lot of work in within an hour of the Bedford office, so sort of Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Northamptonshire, Bedfordshire and Bucks. But we do a lot of work in the East Anglia as well, over in Norfolk and Suffolk. So that gives you an idea roughly where we're working and where our patch is. Oops. Just finally then, to finish the introduction. So today's focus is very much on Bedford. Obviously it's our spiritual home. It's where we've been based for 30 years. So we've got a lot of knowledge, both of the politics, of development opportunities, of the workings of the local authority. But it's a particularly exciting time for Bedford. It's the centre of the Oxford to Cambridge Arc, as many others obviously you know. It's very well connected by both rail and road. It's highly unconstrained in many ways. There is no green belt in this part of the world. There's some flooding, but not extensive amounts of flood zones. So in some ways, it's an area full of opportunity. In terms of the planning context, the council's embarking on a new local plan review, which we'll go into and John will talk to next. And there's also lots of neighbourhood planning activity that we'll talk about as well. And I did think the quote from the Guardian was relatively humorous, that they said it was nicer than you might think. And it's, you know, Bedford's got a lot going for it. It gets a bad reputation, but I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and hopefully presentations today will demonstrate that. So I'll hand over to John, who's going to talk through some of the strategic planning issues faced in Bedford at the moment.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, if the technology seamlessly switches over, there you go. My name's John Goodall. I'm an associate director in the SPRU team, as Andy introduced. 2 points before I start. I personally think Strategic Planning Matters would be a great name for a series of podcasts. I might be the only person who thinks that, but by all means, any questions, use the Q&A function and I'll pick them up as we go through. Second of all, shamelessly, I read through my notes again this morning. I'm pretty sure I was watching MasterChef when I finalised them. So you're going to hear the word ingredients a lot of times. I hope that makes sense. So without further ado, my part of the presentation really takes us back to summer 2019, which is when the Bedford Local Plan examination was undertaken for the current Local Plan 2030. That was a real focus for the company during that year. We made a number of significant contributions that are relevant to this whole presentation, really, particularly in terms of specifically suggesting some of the wording for the review policy that I'll go through, and highlighting to the inspectors the differences between national policy as it was in the NPPF 2012 and the current version that we're working with now. We also directly contributed to discussion on some of the key town centre sites that Andy and Aart will talk you through later. So we really were involved in sort of the whole examination process. And I've put a few of our services down there on the bottom of the slide, which happy to kind of pick up any specific questions on. But as part of the overall time frame for preparing the plan, we took a number of instructions on, in particular, land supply assessment and also older persons need assessments for different projects in the borough that kind of overlapped with the timeframes for the plan. So in terms of what we dealt with in summer 2019, the plan that was submitted for examination, that's what I'll go through first, and then I'll look at the outcomes of that in terms of the local plan review, and then put that in some of the wider context that Andy's introduced in terms of Bedford's location on the Oxcam Arc. So what are we dealing with? Shameless first reference. This is sort of the ingredients list that was in the submission version local plan. I'm not going to dwell on all the points because some of them will come back to specifically, such as local housing need and neighbourhood plans. In terms of a broad overview, the plan that was submitted for examination contained a number of issues. The first one being really, it only ever proposed a plan period substantially less than 15 years upon adoption. And I think it's sort of evidence to anyone that picks up the Local Plan 2030 that it lacks any sort of long-term spatial strategy. I think the nod that you could give to the Borough Council when they were preparing that plan, one of the difficulties that I think the authority faced is, unlike many areas, they actually did adopt a local plan, the Core Strategy 2008, that was very much based on the regional plan as it was at the time. And so when they were preparing the Local Plan 2030, there was kind of a question of, well, what comes next? The problem with the Local Plan 2030 is it doesn't really answer that question. There's a number of strategic priorities that it doesn't deal with. It doesn't even necessarily deal with some of the constraints on town centre sites. And I think if you put that in the context that it took 7 years to progress the plan from sort of preparation through to the outcome of the examination in 2020, that was always going to create something of a problem. So where does that leave us? Well, in terms of neighbourhood plans, which Hannah will come back to, there was obviously a requirement for additional development to be identified in the Local Plan 2030, and its decision was effectively to defer 69% of that onto allocations to be made in neighbourhood plans. So you've kind of got an issue there that isn't just the strategic priorities that the plan needs to address, but even in terms of spatially, what does the plan look like? It doesn't set out specifically how the development that's required is going to come forward. So where does that leave you? Well, the inspectors looked at that list of issues and effectively technologies can move on. The inspectors looked at the discussion in the examination, and their outcome essentially was that that list of issues was the ingredients for an immediate local plan review. And I've just put up there a couple of extracts from the inspector's report. But the important take home really is that what the inspectors proposed in the text of the development plan was something that trumps the requirement in national policy. So the national policy sets out that reviews should be undertaken at least once every 5 years. And as you can see on the screen, the inspectors were explicit that that needs to take place sooner in Bedford. And that's very significant. The wording of the review policy itself, I'll just flash up briefly. When the screen changes over. What I'll do, I'll come back to some of the specific elements of the review in terms of where the council's going now and where that sits in the context of the Oxcam Arc. But the key point in terms of the relationship with national policy is that from January 2023, you will have an entirely different basis for decision taking. Effectively, the tilted balance will apply and the policies in this plan will be considered out of date if the council hasn't submitted a new local plan for examination. And as I say, we assisted with the wording of this, and it's key that that is now text in the development plan and it trumps national policy as a material consideration. So where are we? Well, in terms of the quote I've put at the top there, the council's doing what it was told to do. It's undertaking an immediate review of the Local Plan 2030. It commenced that in summer last year with an extensive call for sites. Unsurprisingly, and I think in credit to that consultation, it is very broad in nature. All the options are back on the table. And in terms of just setting out how the council, I suppose, will address the requirements of the immediate review, it's picked up, I think, immediately that it knows it needs a full 15-year plan period on adoption this time. And it's made specific reference to some of the advantages that the borough has in terms of infrastructure capacity, for example, on the A421. And it assumes the northern alignment of east-west rail as well. So they're kind of doing what they were told, really, in terms of picking up some of those planned improvements and the kind of building blocks for effectively a full policy compliant local plan. But I think the other reason that the council's kind of put this range of options on the table is that they know that a hybrid solution is likely to be necessary. So the pace of delivery and actually getting a mix of sites in the plan is going to be key. And you might call that a hybrid solution. In terms of what that might actually look like in the plan, it's likely to mean that dispersal of growth to some of the most sustainable villages in the borough, or we'd probably say a great number of the sustainable villages in the borough, will have to continue to meet that increase in need and that pace of delivery. So housing need will be an absolutely critical part of the local plan review. The quote from the review at the top there is explicit. This time round, the local plan will have to accord with the calculation for local housing need, whereas as part of the examination in 2019, the borough was very clear that they were progressing their current local plan deliberately to avoid that higher number. But the local plan review won't be able to effectively kick that can down the road. The second quote on this slide is quite significant because the council has said it knows that local housing need will apply from 2020, which is the new base date for the local plan. So that difference that I've calculated in the table, that circa 3,000 units, they need to be provided between 2020 and 2030, and they're simply not contemplated in this version of the local plan. So Hannah will pick up some of the implications of that for neighbourhood planning in particular. Just a final note on this slide, the council did say during the examination, well, the local housing need figure might go down. We obviously know now that government hasn't changed the standard method, and the figure will remain based on the 2014 projection, so it will remain in the order of 1,300 dwellings per annum. In terms of the duty to cooperate, again, the review policy specifically says that there'll have to be strong working relationships between adjoining authorities. I mean, to a degree, that simply repeats the duty to cooperate in national policy. This, interestingly, wasn't a particularly big issue for the local plan 2030, mainly on the basis that Bedford, free from greenbelt constraints, always been able to show that it can meet its own needs. And at that time, its neighbours like Central Beds were also saying they could meet their own needs in full. But obviously, there's an expectation that this will have to be looked at again, both in terms of housing numbers. So Bedford isn't the only authority where local housing need is substantially higher than the emerging plan or the recently adopted plan. But also spatially, I think we understand a lot more now about the potential for development, both on the Oxcam corridor and along the A1 corridor. But to a degree, sort of opportunities for major development in that area, potential new settlements, for example, they're stacking up, and there's probably decisions to be made about, well, which is the most appropriate location, and will that involve some cross-boundary development like Wixham's? Will there be a sort of exchange of unmet needs? That brings us on specifically to the Oxford-Cambridge Spatial Framework. Now, it's interesting to note that the Oxcam arc isn't specifically referred to in the wording of the review policy. What's specifically referred to is the delivery of planned infrastructure schemes. Now, as I've said, the local plan review is already taking account of the alignment of east-west rail, obviously subject to further consultation. And we know that improvements like Caxton Gibbet are already funded, currently going through the planning inspectorate in terms of the development consent order. So where does that sort of leave us in terms of the spatial framework? Well, the key point to take away really is that it'll give us an understanding of that wider spatial context, but it doesn't really change the ingredients for what's already, well, it doesn't change the ingredients for a policy compliant with national policy, updated local plan in Bedford. And if you look at the text of the spatial framework published in February 2021, it says two important things. First of all, it says don't delay plan making anyway. And second of all, it doesn't look like the spatial framework is going to actually set housing targets. It looks like the starting point for those will remain the figure for local housing need. So Bedford Borough already knows what they need to do in terms of meeting the increased requirement for development. What I think the spatial framework will do, it'll obviously provide us, and its role is intended to be spatially specific national policy. It will give us the clue's in the name really, it will give you a wider framework to be consistent with the overall growth objectives for the ARC, but it's unlikely to change what the most appropriate solutions are in Bedford right now. In terms of where that leaves us, yes, it'll take a while to find decisions on some of the solutions that are intended in the spatial framework, one of those being, for example, new settlements, but they're not the only solution that's likely to be relevant for the local plan review in Bedford. So just briefly, in terms of where we are at the moment, Bedford has commenced its local plan review, and as we know, that needs to be submitted by January 2023. Bedford's current timetable provides no contingency for that date, so the submission's indicated in exactly January 2023, and that's as a result of a 6-month delay announced in February this year. The reasons that were given for that partly relate to uncertainties around the Oxford-Cambridge framework and around the government's white paper. And yes, there is still some continued uncertainty regarding infrastructure funding. But actually, in terms of the points we've just been through, so for example, what the spatial framework says, don't delay plan making, there will be transitional arrangements. I think at the end of the day, the review policy text is clear that the review needs to be submitted by January 2023. And whether those issues really provide proper justification for a delay to take you beyond that, again, I kind of come back to the point that I think the ingredients and the building blocks are there for to meet the requirements of the local plan review, meet the requirements for levels of growth set out in government policy, and build on some of those planned improvements and advantages that Bedford Borough does have. So my final point really just summarises that the review policy is a key opportunity to get a plan that's compliant with national policy in place in Bedford. And because we've got this strict guillotine in terms of the requirement for that review to be submitted, again, it comes back to the fact that the review has to be seen as an opportunity to address some of those strategic priorities and opportunities that weren't dealt with by the local plan 2030. And one of those will be early delivery. The spatial framework gives us a good structure to work within going forward, but I think the building blocks are already there, consistent with the opportunities for local plan review. And so I think there's certainly a busy couple of years coming forward. The next consultation on a draft plan is scheduled for this summer, and then a pre-submission consultation scheduled for next year. So there really will be a lot of opportunity for engagement and putting opportunities for development forward to hopefully meet in full the increased requirements for growth in Bedford.
Thanks for that, John. So just hoping technology works again. For those of you that don't already know me, I'm Hannah Albans, one of the Associate Directors in the Bedford office. In my role with DLP, I've been involved in preparing and submitting reps to various stages of neighbourhood plan prep, as well as engaging with neighbourhood planning groups on behalf of clients. I'm here specifically to talk to you about the role and progress of neighbourhood plans in the borough and what impacts, if any, COVID-19 has had on those. I also want to focus on some of the challenges that we have faced when engaging in the neighbourhood plan process and contrast this with some of the successes. Finally, I want to look at what we believe are the key issues arising as a whole across the borough and the approach to neighbourhood planning in general. In terms of what is happening nationally, as you may be aware, in September last year, the government issued changes to neighbourhood planning in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. These changes mainly affected referendums, which were scheduled to take place between the 16th of March 2020 and the 5th of May this year, placing them on hold until at least the 6th of May. These changes haven't stopped examinations proceeding. However, a number of examinations have been impacted as a result, mainly because inspectors have been unable to undertake their site visits due to current restrictions. This means a number of neighbourhood plans are currently held up within the system. Moving forward, it's also not yet clear whether the government will further delay referendums taking place in light of the timescales for the roadmap to recovery. However, it's noted that in Bedford, a number of referendums have been scheduled to take place on the 6th of May, including those in Bromham, Bletsoe and Thurley. Interestingly, the changes also state that there is no requirement for consultation to be face-to-face. However, there are questions to how effective public consultation has been during the pandemic, with the majority of this being virtual. Whether this assists or not is a moot point. It also, however, flags up a danger and one of the persistent criticisms of neighbourhood plans, and that is they can be driven by groups appointed by parish councils without any democratic selection, and then in turn reflect sectional interests. I'll let you ponder and decide upon that yourselves. Oh, just hopefully the next slide will show. There we go. Turning to the local context, as John has previously set out, the Bedford Local Plan was adopted in January 2020. Policy 3S of the local plan sets out that the majority of rural growth within Bedford Borough, except at Roxton, will be delivered through neighbourhood plans. Policy 4S then goes on to specifically set out the settlements that are required to produce a neighbourhood plan and the number of homes that each settlement is expected to achieve. As John's pointed out, in total, approximately 2,175 homes are expected to be delivered through neighbourhood plans in Bedford, and this equates to 69% of the overall minimum housing requirement for the borough. Interestingly, the hierarchy chosen was itself driven by a number of factors, but also excluded some settlements that indicated a higher sustainability score, e.g. where they had the presence of a senior school. The other issue is that the housing numbers were a flat figure and not based on any assessment of capacity. It is also noted that a number of other rural locations, in addition to those listed in Policy 4S, have also opted to prepare neighbourhood plans, including in Bletsoe and Thurley. Under the terms of Policy 4S, Reg 16 neighbourhood plans had to be submitted to the Council by the 15th of January this year, i.e. 12 months from the adoption of the local plan, or the Council would seek to allocate additional sites in those settlements. The reason for this deadline is not overly clear, although there is a suspicion that this was to force parish councils to prepare a plan that allocated land for development. This deadline was also included in the local plan submitted for examination before the inspectors imposed the far stricter immediate review policy applying to the whole plan, which John's referred to earlier. Given the council therefore already recognised the rationale for a deadline for neighbourhood plans, this should be perhaps be viewed in the context of, firstly, the amount of housing to be allocated in those settlements as part of the local plan strategy, and secondly, the potential difficulties with the neighbourhood plan process. It is reasonable to think that the council was anticipating an early review, not least to provide for a longer plan period. And given that allocations in neighbourhood plans are such a substantial part of their requirements, the council were keen to have as many neighbourhood plans in place to deliver sites soon after adoption. It would be right for the council to recognise the difficulty of groups progressing neighbourhood plans slowly under the requirements of the local plan, when in practice, higher requirements are already being looked at in the next local plan update. We are doubtless that this will happen, as politically it is a difficult proposition to proceed upon. A number of neighbourhood plans have in fact missed the deadline of January this year, and the council's latest position is that they are still accepting Reg 16 submissions, perhaps unsurprisingly, but there is also no clear evidence from them what the implications of this are, nor have we seen the borough seek to make any additional allocations in those settlements listed under Policy 4S. Given the council has already announced a circa 6-month delay to the local plan review, it might be argued that the borough are not currently in a position to make any allocations more quickly than neighbourhood plans that are currently being prepared. In the medium and longer term, however, a shorter gap between neighbourhood plans being made and the local plan review, including higher requirements being progressed, could see some neighbourhood plans being in conflict with the strategic policies of the local plan relatively quickly. So just looking at the current status of neighbourhood plans in the borough, out of the 10 main settlements listed under Policy 4S, excluding Roxton, only 2 neighbourhood plans have been formally made. At present, there are 3 Reg 16 consultations underway in Sharnbrook, Harold and Milton Ernest, and 2 Regulation 14 consultations have recently ended in Great Barford and Clapham. We are also led to believe that Great Barford are gearing up to submit their Reg 16 plan shortly, but we are yet to see sight of this. Turvey neighbourhood plan is currently at examination stage, whilst Bromham is awaiting the referendum following examination last year. And we now know from this week that this is scheduled to take place on the 6th of May. Willington neighbourhood plan has been submitted to the council for consideration, and this was back in February, and it's still waiting the Reg 16 consultation. It's not clear at this stage what the delays are of that happening. Out of the 10 settlements listed, only 3 plans were submitted by the deadline as set out within Policy 4S. And as previously set out, it's still not clear what the consequences are for missing this deadline, if any. You will also see from the slide that only one of those plans has in fact planned for additional numbers above the minimum housing requirements set out in Policy 4S. As John has previously set out, the review of the local plan will secure levels of growth that accords with government policy. At present, this indicates an increase of 335 dwellings per annum, and this is clearly going to impact on both existing and emerging neighbourhood plans, as it is expected that the majority of the growth will have to be found in these rural settlements. However, it doesn't appear that this has been factored into the current neighbourhood planning process. So is neighbourhood planning working in Bedford? As a company in an office, we've been actively involved in a number of the neighbourhood plans within Bedford, including those for Great Barford, Sharnbrook, Milton Ernest and Turvey. Generally speaking, our experience has been relatively mixed, and where we have advanced sites that do not fall in with the perceived wisdom of the neighbourhood plan group, we have found groups reluctant to engage and are selective in what information they will and will not accept or provide. For example, in some instances, some of those groups would not accept any developer details or additional information that was put forward to them through the process. We've also across the board seen various approaches to site assessment and how sites are considered. And this does raise questions generally as to whether there should be a common approach applied across the borough. At present, there doesn't appear to be any clear guidance from the borough on this, and it'll be interesting to see if this comes round as part of their plan review. Whilst accepting that each site should be assessed on its own merits, it would appear there needs to be some consistent approach to matters to be considered. This is particularly important in terms of the robustness of the evidence base of the neighbourhood plan. One particular instance we have had is that a neighbourhood plan assessed a site on a smaller site area to that which was provided to them through the process. They set out that they had assessed the site on the basis of that which was submitted as part of the local plan call for sites exercise back in 2014. And this in turn led to incorrect information being presented as part of their assessment. More widely, there is an issue that by looking to provide for the housing allocations required through neighbourhood plans, the Borough Council has inevitably deferred decisions on other priorities that are strategically important to individual settlements and the rural area more widely. This certainly includes planning for things such as school places, but also issues such as sustainable transport and open space. The local plan does, however, accept that, particularly where allocations as 500 units are required, scale of development and nature of issues may be strategic in nature. And therefore, there is a question as to whether neighbourhood plans are the solution to this scale of growth. In many instances, there has also been a lack of transparency on the information that has been published on various neighbourhood plan websites or given to the members of the public. And this in turn has had an effect on how meaningful we think public engagement has been and what information is being shared as part of that. Generally, we have found in those areas which have been allocated a smaller number of homes, they have been more willing to engage with developers and promoters than those have been given a larger allocation. And this is where we found we've had more success in the neighbourhood plan process. There have also been questions raised as how effective and meaningful consultation has been during the pandemic. It's not yet clear whether the response rate has increased as a result of the pandemic or whether fewer people are engaging. This does raise a question as to how representative the neighbourhood plans are of the general public and the localities that they present. So just to sum up, upon review of the neighbourhood plans in Bedford, only 1 out of those 10 listed under 4S has planned for its minimum housing requirement. We've also found that the allocation of a minimum number of homes has in some cases actually restricted development in locations that could accommodate more growth. There is little acknowledgement within both the local plan or any of the neighbourhood plans produced for other types of needs arising as well, including those for specialist housing. And the focus has tended to be on the provision and allocation of sites for general housing. Those neighbourhood plans with larger allocations of circa 500 have also focused on the delivery of a single allocation, aside from Bromham, which is considered as first strategy for growth. And we understand that this is on the basis that this would secure better infrastructure provisions for schools, etc. However, upon review of the evidence base, a number of alternatives have been considered for a dispersed strategy that would in turn deliver the same amount of infrastructure and things required. And there's questions over whether this is the best approach, particularly in light of the fact that a number of these places are likely going to have to consider additional sites in the not too distant future through the plan review. As a result of this and the delays that have been faced in both submission and the making of plans, there have also been a number of speculative applications made on sites which are not the chosen allocation. This is particularly the case in Great Barford, and a number of those have been delayed in the decision-making process on the basis of the neighbourhood plan progression. There is also no clear cut-off from the council as to when they will stop accepting Regulation 16 submissions, or what the consequences are for missing the deadline earlier this year. This in turn raises questions as to the purpose of this particular local plan policy, and due to delays, how this will be dealt with in the local plan review. So hopefully that's provided you with some interesting thoughts, and if you have any questions, do please send them through the Q&A function and we'll pick them up at the end. But just touching on what services DLP and SPRU offer, we are actively involved in preparing neighbourhood plans across England, and we represent a number of clients who wish to promote land through the neighbourhood plan process. We'll circulate our details at the end of the webinar, but that's my summary on the neighbourhood plan position in Bedford. So I'm now going to pass over to Andy, who's going to talk about the Friars site that they've been involved in.
Thanks, Hannah. Sorry, some technical issues there. So I just want to talk through the urban focus within the local plan. As Hannah's mentioned, there's a large proportion of the local plan allocations come through neighbourhood plans. That's not to say, however, that the council have also in the plan provided an urban focus. I'm just going to share my video. Apologies. That's better. Sorry. So hopefully I'll talk through now the urban focus as well in the local plan 2030, and a key focus of that is a handful of sites in the town centre. We've been lucky enough to be involved with the redevelopment of the Greyfriars police station, which is one of the first sites to come forward in the town centre. So what I want to do is just talk you through some of the work we've been doing over the last few years, and use it as a bit of a showcase, really, to show some of the work that our colleagues in BE1 have been doing to bring that application forward. Right, so hopefully if we scoot on to the next slide. There we go. So as I say, there's been a focus on a handful of large sites within the town centre, Greyfriars being one of them. We were appointed by the Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire in the summer of 2018 to first look at the site and the potential it held for redevelopment. As for those of you that know Bedford, it's a prominent site in the centre of the town. The police have been vacating that building now for a number of years and relocating their services to headquarters over in Kempston. So there's always been, certainly for the recent past, there's been an ambition to sell the asset and gain a capital receipt for the police. So the allocation of the site was the first step in achieving that, and that we were helping the Police and Crime Commissioner through the local plan process to secure that allocation. We were then instructed to help them submit a planning application for the redevelopment. Some services have been retained in the centre of Bedford, so there's a small police station for community policing retained on Lime Street, but by and large the services have been relocated to Kempston now. In terms of the planning merits of the site, I mean, it's a highly prominent site just to the west of the town centre, highly sustainable location, directly opposite the bus station, 5-minute walk to the train station in town. Obviously it's brownfield, it's a key gateway location into the town centre, so you're right on the boundary of the shopping centre and the town centre. It's also, the council have acknowledged that it's a very much a tired area of Bedford, so it's very much in need of regeneration, and I'll touch on that later in the presentation in terms of how the council has dealt with it in terms of future regeneration efforts. So yeah, just for those that don't know Bedford very well, the town centre in the centre of this map here, where the high street is, Greyfriars is just to the west, just next to the Stagecoach Bedford depot, on the sort of large roundabout that you can see there. That's the Greyfriars roundabout. The roundabout itself is a key, identified as a key barrier, really, in terms of pedestrian movements, particularly. It's a rather large and ungainly roundabout for the nature of the road network there. So one of the key components of the Greyfriars redevelopment is removing that large barrier and replacing it with something that allows the flow of pedestrians and a better interaction between or at the street scene level. So let me just talk you through some of the key points. The site's allocated under policy 11, and that sets out, as you can see there in the text, a sort of broad criteria-based approach to development. There's also a master plan that the council produced in the summer of 2018, which doesn't have formal SPD status, but it's been endorsed by the members through the committee. It's very much been driven by the Mayor of Bedford as his sort of vision for the town centre. This area falls within a sort of wider regeneration area known as the sort of station to town area. And as you can see from that plan there, the Greyfriars building itself is the pink block at the sort of northeastern edge of the site next to the roundabout, and that's the police station. There are other buildings within the wider sort of Greyfriars area that aren't under the control of the PCC. So a key challenge for us, which I'll come on to, was how do we bring forward a small portion of that site when the council has sort of identified it as part of a much wider regeneration effort. The master plan that the council endorsed sets out a number of key parameters for site redevelopment. So it talks about land uses, it talks about maximum building heights, capacity, identifies potential for sort of 350 new homes in the wider regeneration area. It gives a rough block layout and identifies the need for a stronger gateway building on that approach into the town centre. And also, as I say, talks about the realignment of the road to remove the roundabout. The bottom line is, it's a very exciting opportunity that doesn't come around very often in places like Bedford. So there's a real opportunity to deliver something exciting for the town, and it was something that we were really pleased to get involved with. There was a number of challenges, or have been a number of challenges throughout the course of the project. We're at the stage now where we have, the planning applications in. We're hoping that it will be approved in the not too distant future. We're hoping later this spring to have an approval. Obviously, given that it's we're acting on behalf of a police and crime commissioner, there are politics at play. So the police are part of what's called the One Public Estate group, which involves the council and other public bodies. So as part of the project, we've had to make sure that we're working collaboratively, or the police have been working collaboratively with their One Public Estate partners to bring forward the land. So that has been a challenge, but something that we've relished and we've enjoyed getting involved in. The viability is a key issue, as many people will know. So obviously it's a scheme that's in the centre of town. The community infrastructure levy applies in Bedford, and a key issue for us really is how to make the scheme viable with the policy requirements that it's got. 30% affordable housing, SIL. The council's requested some Section 106 money as well, and also deliver everything that the policy wants it to deliver, including the realignment of the road scheme. So with those negotiations are still very much ongoing, and we're hopeful that they'll be concluded in the next few months. The vision is something that we've sort of grappled with as well, and sort of trying to achieve something in Bedford that raises the standard of design, is innovative, and as I say, as it's the first parcel of land really that's come forward in this regeneration area, it's very much a focal point because it sits right on the Greyfriars junction, trying to sort of convince the authority and local people that this site can really take a landmark building that will raise the standard of design in Bedford. Was something that we wanted to set out and do from the start. We've engaged with the local community, and we've created or attempted to create a mix of land uses that sort of seeks to meet their aspirations within the sort of context of the policy. Market conditions is obviously important, so we've been looking at what type of uses. The policy talks about commercial uses on the ground floor. Obviously, retail demand at the moment is not particularly high, so we had to look at what other uses could be attractive to a market. Obviously, we're working on behalf of the landowner, not necessarily a developer, so we have to make something that can be put to market that is going to be attractive when the PCC does put it to the market. And generally, the brief was to create a legacy and a catalyst to kickstart the regeneration in the town centre, and specifically within the Greyfriars area of the town. So what I'll do now is hand over to Aart, who led on the design aspects of the scheme, and Aart can talk you through the design approach and the considerations that he took into account when designing the scheme that we submitted for planning.
Thank you, Andy, for the introduction. My name is Aart Koning. I lead BE1 Architects. We provide the architects and the master planning as part of the DOP consulting group. That includes small-scale bespoke projects to large-scale master plans and build projects. We find that as architects, we are more and more at the forefront of changes we face as a society. it result in the repurposing of existing buildings, and also introducing residential developments in non-residential areas. And part of this is also reflected in the project at Friars. Now, as you can see, as Andy already alluded to, the site of the Friars project, as you can see it here outlined in red, next to the Friars roundabout, close to the bus station in orange, and in green you can see the walkway, a few minutes walkway to the train station. It's in a key location also when entering the site, when entering Bedford, with leading to the town centre, and therefore seen as quite a gateway development. The complex is really quite diverse, with Victorian residential properties to the southwest, large-scale 12-story towers from BPHA to the north, set in quite open landscape, and sort of the train station next door, with flanked by the roundabout, and the roundabout is very much a bit of like a barrier. Hence, the council are looking to change that to traffic light controlled system. Now, as Andy already mentioned, the master plan for the town centre was developed by Bedford, and our site here to the north of Friars very much started to become the trigger point for realising the master plan. The master plan is quite widespread, it's quite ambitious, and it does mean introducing a change to Bedford as a local provincial town. But it doesn't, the challenges it faces is that it doesn't really recognize land ownership boundaries. And you can see that there's buildings here are set across the Friars boundary. And it also includes public access routes leading through currently private land. So we highlighted it in the early stages to the local planning authority that actually realizing the master plan in a bit by bit stage may make it not realized. It also sets heights for buildings. Initially, we of course, during the various pre-app stages, we try to challenge that. We try to make efficient use of the site. And eventually we managed to get a scheme here that very much related and challenges some of those story heights as well. Now, as you can see here, the buildings of the existing police station, they're very often defined with police station. They're located in landmark positions, and therefore they're now becoming available for redevelopment. And you can see also here how the new traffic junction actually start to redefine the site as it was now. So from that point onward, we start to work closely with the local authority in making best use of this land for development. As Andy said, the Bedfordshire Police, they were looking to sell the site and optimize therefore the value, so they can invest in their services and in other projects they're looking at. That was the main objective. You can see here also the 12-story towers. The rationale between the configuration of the development is quite logical. Initially, we started to introduce low-scale buildings adjacent to the Victorian residential properties in Private Street, and then buildings stepping up towards the larger entryway into the town centre. What we then did is we introduced building blocks that goes around the corner to create a stronger civic presence, and also to shield some of the internal courtyards for noise coming from the urban areas. This then introduced quite an interesting discussion with the local planning authority, because obviously the intention from the master plan was to create a public route through the sites and the adjacent sites. Something that we initially encouraged, because we think it could be a really nice aspiration for that to be developed and to set the tone for the rest of the master plan. But the planners actually also realized that perhaps that became a bit unrealistic because not every site will be available. So we may end up creating pedestrian routes going through the site, a site that would be owned and managed by the local residents, and in fact would not lead to anywhere. So it was eventually encouraged by the planners to perhaps not to create the permeability of the site. The next step is then we start to articulate the blocks. So we recognize that it was very much a three-dimensional site, and the dynamics of the site is very much about movement around the site and by forming the gateway. That then led us to creating an articulation of the facade that further emphasized the movement of the of people and of cars around the site, and also the stepping of the blocks from recognizing the setting of the Victorian houses and the opportunities that tall buildings give. It is important probably to say that high density developments offer a lot of opportunities. They offer opportunities for more sustainable mode of transport, for more sustainable means of using energy, also for creating affordable developments and creating multi-generational developments. So developments where people can actually call their home and try and stay for a long time. Therefore, they get to know other people, create a community, and so on. And all those developments are there for the enhancement of the community of Bedford. The scheme is then, because it has south-facing balcony, south-facing courtyards, south-facing roof terraces, there's the opportunity to create fantastic amenity space. So it was a development that was very much strongly led by landscape at the roof level and within the courtyards. That has the benefit of introducing 1 bed, 2 beds, and also family units, which is also very much welcomed by local residents. That was enabled by hiding the car parking. The car parking was located at a first floor deck, and also the car was located underneath the first floor deck and in the basement car parking, while access would be provided both of Friars and of the Parry Street. As it was an outline application with all methods served apart from access, we looked into the detail of the access and of car parking, bin storage, the side of storage, and so on, quite a lot of detail, so it was properly addressed. We looked at a modular system where we can actually introduce some flexibility and a mix of residential units within the building. So we looked at a means of incorporating 1 bed, 2 bed, and 3 bed units throughout the building, and an area of town center users on the ground floor. And then gave a series of ingredients that start to form the building. So we had car parking in the basement on the ground floor, residential units and town center users on the ground floor. And then we had that allowed the opportunity to establish Parry Street as a new residential road. We created landscape private courtyards and landscape decks on the roof, and created a new residential building that stepped up to about 9 floors. This is then an impression of the building that started to look like. So we created the animated landscape courtyards, and also addressing the more urban character in the face of the building at the roundabout. Once we're doing that, we try to create buildings that is really transparent. So there's a good connection between the residential units and the public realm, so that we avoid creating sort of anonymous towers as are located across the road here, which become not very informative for the public realm. And as you can see here, some of the buildings, how it then started to develop, very much as a dynamic building that articulates the identity of the site, where we have a good connection between inside and outside, also during the evening. We have an animated street scene with the variety of town center users that are available, and also as you move around the site, you can see the building developing, and you get a good understanding of the place, and a building with an identity that then can start to inform the rest of the master plan. So that is as far as we took it for this application. I think I'll hand you over back to Hannah to conclude our presentation.
Thanks, Art. I think I'll just pick up there and conclude, because we're pretty much bang on 11 o'clock. So just to conclude, thank you to everyone who's presented this morning. Just to bring together some key strands really from what we've all said. I think at the moment there is a sort of period of change in Bedford. We've hinted at the local plan review and increase in housing targets. Oxford Cambridge Arc obviously is a huge thing for Bedford. So opportunity is the conclusion really to take from it. It's an opportunity in Bedford now to look at development options going forward. As I say, the local housing needs increasing to over 1,300 houses a year from 2020, as John said in his presentation, and that's key. Obviously, with the infrastructure that's going to come with the Oxford Cambridge Arc as well, both in terms of East West Rail and other road improvements. So Bedford's well positioned, strategically located for investment going forward. And I think one thing that we've realised as well in the sort of current climate, working from home, I think people are less drawn to cities now for work and setting up homes. So places like Bedford that are still commutable to cities, but actually provide a better quality of life, cheaper house prices, I think will become more attractive going forwards. As we've said, there's a lot of neighbourhood planning activity going on. Some are delivering houses quickly, some aren't, but we think that the general view in DLP is that the villages are going to have to take some more growth in the next local plan review, and it remains to be seen specifically which villages will be targeted, but there is inevitably only a limit to how much can be developed within the urban area of Bedford and through new settlements. So there will be some dispersed growth of some form, we believe. And also there's exciting investment opportunities in the town centre. The council are very much pushing regeneration efforts in the town centre, funding from national government. Sites such as Friars are being put through the planning system and will be coming to market in the not too distant future. So there will be investment in the town, which will bring wealth and excitement to the town that we're based in. So we think it's an exciting time for Bedford. So our knowledge of Bedford is unrivaled here at DLP. So if you do have any questions about development opportunities in Bedford, then we'll be more than happy to assist you. We do have a quick 5 minutes or so for questions if anyone does have any. I think looking at the chat, we haven't had any raised today, but there are a few I think that we've sort of pre-prepared just for discussion purposes, really. The first one I was going to ask to Art, just going back to the Friars presentation, Art. In terms of community engagement, do you want to just talk through what was done on the scheme and how it was received locally?
Yes, of course. The community engagement was quite informative. The community of Bedford is quite diverse. There's many different languages being spoken in the local area. It was good to get their feedback. We met with ward councillors quite early on in the pre-up stages, so we get some initial feel what played in the community. And then later on, we met actually at various occasions with the local residents, various different residents groups, and discussed the proposal with them. And they actually really initially the concern was car parking, which is what you expect. So they were pleased that we provided the appropriate level of car parking spaces, even though it is a very sustainable location close to the bus and the train station. There was no pressure on having more cars parked in the local area. What I did appreciate as well is that we're creating a mix of residential units within the development. So from family units to starter units, if you like. And they also understood this issue of density results in affordability, and therefore it will add to their community. Interestingly, the town centre users was very much seen as an opportunity to introduce elements that would harmonise the community, somewhere a place where a community could meet, and that is something that they're currently lacking. And interestingly enough, we met so much support that they even wrote a letter to the council to support the planning application that was submitted, because their only concern really was what would happen if this was not going to be delivered as it was now. So that was a nice surprise.
Yeah, I've just got a quick question for John, really, touching on what I obviously discussed in terms of neighbourhood plans and as Andy's touched on in his sort of summary. If they're not delivering on time and in effect falling behind, what implications does that have on the 5-year housing land supply position?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Hannah. One of the reasons for review that we didn't pick up on, but the inspectors in their report did mention it specifically. They did say that there's a risk of the Bedford Local Plan housing trajectory falling behind. So they did flag that as an issue. And one of the ways around that issue was that the inspectors kind of recognised that the plan had delivered more in the early years, and therefore that there might be effectively an excuse. But because some of the old regional plan sites were front loaded, then maybe the neighbourhood plans could take a bit longer. But as part of those findings, I mean, you're right, that those sites are supposed to be coming forward through neighbourhood plans now. And there was an interesting appeal decision earlier this week in Willington, where under the council's own evidence, following the approach that the local plan inspectors took to oversupply, then the council wouldn't be able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply. Their way around that problem was effectively to take even more account of what they've already delivered, which is not what the inspectors said. And that just got them over a 5-year threshold. I think it's not just the neighbourhood plan sites not happening, but unlocking the town centre sites is also part of that trajectory. So, yeah, you know, you would have thought that if for example, that neighbourhood plan deadline had been hit, then maybe the borough would get to 2023 and have a 5-year land supply throughout. It's looking like that certainly isn't going to be guaranteed. And you know, the worst, well, not even the worst case scenario, the worst or local plan case scenario would suggest that the 5-year land supply is at best marginal now, and probably below the 5-year figure.
I think just to add to that, John, you touched in terms of town centre sites. Obviously, we're progressing Friars, and we hope to have a permission on that later this spring. But in terms of the other urban sites, I mean, there's 3 key ones. I've got a copy here of the council's trajectory, and the other 3 large sites are Borough Hall itself, where the council offices are, and that's allocated in the plan with an estimated capacity over the plan period of 225 units. And then there's another 390 units on land south of that. This is labelled as south of the river. Now, and also not forgetting Ford End Road, which is another significant site allocated for about 700 units. Now, you know, none of those other sites have come forward through the planning system as far as we're aware. There's land ownership issues to be resolved. Those sites are in multiple ownerships, and some of them have been allocated for a number of years within the development plan in Bedford. So, you know, they're not going to deliver housing quickly, I think is the point. And couple that with delays in the neighbourhood planning process, as John said, that all leads to the fact that the housing land supply position in Bedford is likely to get worse before it gets better, I think.
I've got a question for John as well, actually. We're working on quite a few sites now within Bedford, and very often I find they come forward by individual landowners. Do you think there's a growing role for development corporations to have a role in the borough?
Short answer to that is yes, but and development corporations are flagged in the spatial framework, the introduction to the spatial framework, as are some of the sort of deprivation issues in Bedford. So yeah, you can see a role for a development corporation potentially being another tool to unlock those sites. I suppose there's another strand to what a development corporation might end up focusing on in the ARC, which is clearly the delivery of new settlements. So I think to some degree, whether they focus on town centres or new settlements is still to be decided. I mean, in terms of the town centre sites themselves, there is funding already in place, you know, for example, through the High Streets Fund. So I think to unlock all those sites doesn't necessarily rely on a development corporation anyway. It's probably about being realistic about what the actual timeframes for achieving development on those sites is. Obviously, like from your presentation on Friars, clearly capable of coming forward sooner. Whereas if you wait for a development corporation on Ford End Road, it's another potential solution, but I don't think it necessarily to be the only solution. You know, so much work has gone into unlocking those sites for years now. But yeah, it's a potential area of focus, I suppose, is the simplest answer.
Thanks, John. I'm conscious we've run over by about 10 minutes, but I think it was useful to discuss those sort of threads coming out of the presentation.
The hand raised, Hannah, I don't know if that's...
Yeah, Simon just asked a question about which of those sites are deliverable. I think Andy touched on that in his response, really, in terms of we don't know which ones are on the market at the minute, but yeah, certainly ones to keep an eye on.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending, for listening in, for bearing with us with the slight hiccups in the technology. Hopefully you found it interesting and useful, and sort of giving you some food for thought in terms of the opportunities that are available in and around Bedford. I want to just say thank you to Hannah, Art and John for their time, for putting the presentations together and delivering them this morning. If anyone does have any further questions arising, then by all means drop us an email on any of the email addresses on the slides there. We will circulate the slides for information after this, so you have those as a hard copy. Do keep in touch with us. We are hoping to do another webinar on other topics probably in May, so we'll circulate details of that nearer the time, and it'd be great if you could join us again for that with some different members of the Bedford team. So thanks again for joining us, and hope you found it useful, and catch up soon.